Imagine an ancient city, vibrant and full of life. Ur of the Chaldees. This is where our story begins, at a time when civilization was just beginning to flourish. Amidst the bustling markets, imposing temples, and mud houses, there lived a man named Abram. He was an ordinary man, with a simple life, but with a heart full of faith and hope. One day, as Abram was tending his flocks and reflecting on life, something extraordinary happened. God, the creator of all things, appeared to him. It was not a physical apparition, but a powerful and clear voice that resonated in his heart. Abram felt a divine presence, a sense of peace and purpose that he had never experienced before. God spoke to Abram with words that would change the course of his life forever. Leave your country, your relatives, and your father's house, and go to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great. Genesis 12 verses 1-2. Abram was perplexed. Leave everything behind? His homeland, his family, his home? It was a huge, almost incomprehensible request. But there was something in God's voice, an authority and a love that Abram could not ignore. He felt a fire ignite in his heart, a fire of faith and courage. He looked around at everything he knew and loved. His wife Sarai, his family, his friends, his flocks. It was a difficult decision, but Abram knew God had spoken, and he was willing to obey. He shared the vision with Sarai, and together they decided to follow God's call. The preparations began. Abram and Sarai packed up their few possessions, gathered their flocks, and said goodbye to their loved ones. It was a time of tears and hugs, but also of hope and anticipation. They were leaving behind everything they knew, but they were moving toward a divine promise. And so Abram and Sarai, accompanied by their nephew Lot and his servants, set out from Ur of the Chaldees. They did not know exactly where they were going, but they trusted that God would guide them. The journey was long and arduous, full of challenges and uncertainties, but Abram's faith never wavered. With every step, Abram felt the presence of God at his side, guiding, protecting, and encouraging him. He knew he was part of something greater, something that transcended his own life. And so, with courage and faith, Abram moved forward toward the promised land, toward the fulfillment of God's promise. And this is just the beginning of the incredible journey of Abram, a man who would become an example of faith and obedience for all future generations. After receiving God's call, Abram wasted no time. He knew the journey would be long and challenging, but his faith was unshakable. With a heart full of hope and determination, he began to prepare to leave his homeland, Ur of the Chaldees. Abram gathered his family and belongings. His wife Sarai, a woman of great beauty and strength, was by his side, supporting him in every decision. Together, they packed their possessions, loaded their flocks, and said goodbye to their loved ones. It was a moment of great emotion, with tears and hugs, but also of anticipation for the future. Accompanying Abram and Sarai was Lot, Abram's nephew. Lot was young and full of energy, and his presence brought joy and vigor to the journey. They also took their servants and animals with them, forming a great caravan that would cross deserts and mountains. The journey to Canaan was not easy. They faced rough terrain, extreme climates, and the uncertainty of the unknown. But through each challenge, Abram found strength in his faith. He knew that God was with him, guiding and protecting him. During the journey, Abram built altars in significant places, marking his faith and devotion to God. These altars served as visible reminders of God's promise and the journey they were undertaking. They were also places of rest and reflection, where Abram and his family could renew their strength and reaffirm their purpose. One of the most challenging moments of the journey was the crossing of the desert. The scorching sun, the lack of water, and physical exhaustion tested everyone's endurance. But Abram never lost heart. He encouraged his family and servants, reminding them of God's promise and the prosperous land that awaited them. Finally, after many days of traveling, they came into sight of Canaan. The land was lush and fertile, a stark contrast to the desert they had crossed. Abram felt profound gratitude and joy. He knew he had arrived at the place God had promised him. In Canaan, Abram continued to build altars and worship God. He established his home and began exploring the land, marveling at its beauty and abundance. With each step, he felt God's presence, confirming that he was on the right path. The journey to Canaan was a testament to Abram's faith and obedience. He left everything behind, trusting in God's promise, and was rewarded with a prosperous land and a future full of hope. His story serves as an inspiring example of how faith can guide us through life's challenges and lead us to a destination of blessing and fulfillment. After a long and arduous journey, Abram and his family finally arrived in Canaan. The land was as beautiful as Abram had imagined, lush, fertile, and full of life. But most of all, it was the land God had promised to him and his descendants. Abram felt a deep sense of gratitude and renewed faith as he set foot on that sacred ground. One night, as Abram gazed at the stars in the sky above Canaan, God appeared to him again. This time, the promise was even clearer and more powerful. God told Abram, "Arise, walk through the land in its length and in its breadth, for I will give it to you." Genesis 13, verse 17. Abram felt a thrill of excitement and awe. He knew he was living in a historic moment, a moment that would change the course of his life and that of future generations. Filled with faith and devotion, Abram began to walk through the land of Canaan. He walked through the valleys, climbed the hills, and explored the rivers. At each place he visited, he built an altar. These altars were not just physical landmarks. They were symbols of his faith and gratitude to God. Each altar was a public declaration that Abram trusted God's promise and was willing to follow his calling. One of the first altars Abram built was between Bethel and Ai. He chose a high place where he could see the vastness of the promised land. He carefully stacked stones one on top of the other, creating a monument that would last for generations. As he built, he prayed, thanking God for his faithfulness and asking for strength to continue his journey. Abram also built altars in Shechem and Hebron. Each altar had a special meaning, marking moments of encounter with God and renewal of his faith. These altars served as visible reminders of God's promise in Abram's journey. They were also places of worship and reflection, where Abram and his family could gather to praise God and reaffirm their commitment to him. God's renewed promise to Abram was not just about the land, it was about a nation. God promised to make Abram a great nation, one that would bless all the families of the earth through him. Abram, though old and childless, believed God's promise. He knew that God was faithful and would keep his word. Abram's faith was unwavering. He didn't just believe God's promise, he acted on it. He left his homeland, faced challenges, and built altars, all because he trusted God's word. His faith was active, alive, and contagious. It inspired those around him and served as an example of obedience and devotion. God's renewed promise to Abram in Canaan was a turning point in his journey. It was a reminder that God was with him, guiding him and protecting him. It was a call to continue walking in faith, even in the face of uncertainty and challenges. And it was a promise of a future filled with blessings and fulfillment. Abram, through his faith and devotion, marked the land of Canaan with altars that would last for generations. These altars were testimonies to his journey of faith and to God's faithfulness. They served as visible reminders of God's promise and Abram's journey, inspiring future generations to walk in faith and obedience. And so, with renewed promise and unwavering faith, Abram continued his journey into Canaan, marking the land with his devotion and preparing the way for the nation God had promised. After years of traveling and living together, Abram and his nephew Lot had accumulated great prosperity. Their herds had grown so large that the land no longer seemed large enough to sustain them all. Abram's herdsmen and Lot's herdsmen began to clash over the best pastures and water sources. The tension between them grew with each passing day, threatening the peace and harmony that had always existed between the two families. Abram, always wise and fair, realized that the situation was becoming untenable. He knew that something had to be done to prevent the conflict from escalating further. With a heart full of love and concern, Abram called Lot for a conversation. He wanted to find a solution that was fair and that would preserve the friendship and mutual respect between them. Lot, Abram said, "Let there be no discord between us or between our herdsmen, for we are brothers. The whole land is before you. Please separate yourself from me. If you go to the left, I will go to the right. If you go to the right, I will go to the left." Genesis 13 verses 8 to 9. Lot was amazed at Abram's generosity and wisdom. He knew that his uncle was acting with justice and love, seeking the best for both of them. Lot looked around at the land that stretched out before him. His eyes fell on the Jordan Plain, a fertile, well-watered area ideal for his flocks. "I will choose the Jordan Plain," Lot said with gratitude and determination. He knew that this was the best option for him and his flocks, and he was grateful to Abram for giving him the opportunity to choose. Abram, for his part, remained in Canaan. He knew that God was with him and that the promised land was sufficient to sustain his family and his flocks. Abram continued to build altars and worship God, reaffirming his faith and devotion. He knew that no matter what the circumstances, God would be with him, guiding and protecting him. The separation from Lot was a moment of great significance in Abram's life. It was a test of his faith and his ability to make just and wise decisions. Abram demonstrated that even in the face of conflict and challenges, it is possible to act with love, justice, and generosity. His actions served as an inspiring example for Lot and all future generations. From that moment on, Abram and Lot went their separate ways, but their friendship and mutual respect remained unshakable. Abram continued to live in Canaan, fulfilling God's promise and preparing the way for the nation that God had promised. Lot, in turn, settled in the plain of the Jordan, seeking prosperity and peace for himself and his family. The story of Lot's separation is a powerful reminder that even in the face of conflict and challenges, it is possible to find just and peaceful solutions. Abraham and Lot teach us that faith, generosity, and love are essential to living in harmony and fulfilling God's purpose in our lives. Life in Canaan was peaceful, but the peace was abruptly interrupted by a conflict involving several kings of the region. 4 powerful kings, led by Kedorlaomer, king of Elam, invaded the land and defeated a coalition of 5 local kings, including the king of Sodom, where Lot had settled. The battle was fierce and devastating, leaving a trail of destruction and capturing many prisoners, including Lot and his family. When Abram learned that his nephew Lot had been captured, he did not hesitate. Moved by a deep sense of loyalty and family love, Abram decided to act immediately. He gathered his trained men, born in his house, a total of 318 brave men well prepared for battle. Abram knew that the mission would be dangerous, but his faith and courage were unshakable. He was determined to rescue Lot and restore peace. Abram and his men set out on an arduous journey, pursuing the enemy armies that had captured Lot. They followed the trail of the invaders, crossing unfamiliar lands and facing challenges along the way. Finally, they reached the armies of Kedorlaomer and Dan, north of Canaan. Abram, with a well-planned strategy, attacked the enemy at night, taking them by surprise. The battle was fierce, but the courage and determination of Abram and his men prevailed. They defeated the enemy armies and rescued Lot, along with all the prisoners and their possessions. The victory was a testament to the bravery and leadership of Abram, who not only rescued his nephew, but also freed many others who had been captured. After the victory, Abram returned to Canaan, carrying with him the joy and relief of a successful rescue. On the way back, he met a mysterious and enigmatic figure, Melchizedek, king of Salem and priest of the Most High God. Melchizedek brought bread and wine and blessed Abram, acknowledging the greatness of his victory and God's protection over him. "Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth," said Melchizedek. "And blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand." Genesis 14 verses 19 to 20. Abram, deeply touched by Melchizedek's blessing, offered him a tenth of everything in gratitude and recognition of God's protection and blessings. This encounter was a moment of great spiritual significance, reaffirming Abram's faith and the presence of God in his life. The Battle of the Kings and the rescue of Lot were defining events in Abram's life. They demonstrated his courage, leadership, and unwavering faith. Abram not only rescued his nephew, but he also showed the world God's strength and protection. His story serves as an inspiring example of how faith and courage can overcome the greatest challenges and bring victory and blessing. After these events, Abram continued to live in Canaan, fulfilling God's promise and preparing the way for the nation God had promised. His life was a living testimony of God's faithfulness and blessing, inspiring future generations to walk in faith and obedience. One quiet night, as Abram gazed up at the starry sky of Canaan, he had a divine vision that would change the course of his life forever. God appeared to him, not with audible words, but with a powerful presence and a clear message that resonated in his heart. Abram felt a deep peace and an unshakable certainty that God was speaking directly to him. "Do not be afraid, Abram," God said. "I am your shield. Your reward will be exceedingly great." Abraham, still childless and advanced in age, responded humbly and sincerely, "O Lord God, what will you give me, seeing I go childless, and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus?" God, understanding Abram's concerns, made him an extraordinary promise. "Look toward heaven and count the stars. If you are able to number them, so will your descendants be." Abram looked up toward heaven and saw an infinity of stars shining in the darkness of the night. He felt a surge of hope and faith, knowing that God, the creator of the universe, was making a covenant with him. Abram believed God's promise, and it was credited to him as righteousness. To seal the covenant, God instructed Abram to bring a heifer, a goat, a ram, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. Abram obeyed, bringing the animals and dividing them in half, placing each half opposite the other. Birds of prey swooped down on the animals, but Abram drove them away. As the sun set, a deep sleep fell upon Abram, and he had a terrifying vision. It was said to him, "Know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and they will be enslaved and oppressed for 400 years. And I will judge the nation to which they will serve as slaves, and afterward they will come out with great riches." As the sun set and darkness covered the land, a flaming torch passed between the divided animals. At that moment, God made a covenant with Abram, promising him not only numerous descendants but also a land. "To your descendants I will give this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river Euphrates." Genesis 15, verse 18. God's covenant with Abram was a moment of profound spiritual significance. It was an everlasting covenant, a promise that God would be with Abram and his descendants, guiding, protecting, and blessing them. Abram, with his unwavering faith, became an example of obedience and trust in God. From that moment on, Abram lived with the certainty that God would fulfill his promise. He continued to build altars and worship God, reaffirming his faith and devotion. His life was a living testimony of God's faithfulness and blessings, inspiring future generations to walk in faith and obedience. God's covenant with Abram was the foundation of a nation, the beginning of a journey that would change the course of history. It was a powerful reminder that God is faithful to his promises and that through faith we can inherit the blessings and purpose he has for our lives. Years passed, and Abram and Sarai still had no children. God's promise of descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky seemed far away, and the weight was becoming increasingly difficult to bear. Sarai, now advanced in age and barren, began to despair. She knew that God had promised Abram a son, but time was passing, and hope was beginning to fade. Then Sarai had an idea. She decided that if she could not give Abram a son, perhaps her Egyptian servant Hagar could do so. Sarai called Abram and said, "The Lord has kept me from having children. Please sleep with my servant. Perhaps I can build a family through her." Genesis 16, verse 2. Abram agreed to Sarai's plan, and Hagar became his concubine. Hagar, a young Egyptian woman who had served Sarai faithfully for many years, was now in a position of great responsibility. She knew that carrying Abram's child was an honor and privilege, but also a challenging task. When Hagar became pregnant, the dynamics in Abram's household changed dramatically. Sarai, who had previously been respected and honored, began to feel jealous and resentful. As Hagar's pregnancy progressed, tension between her and Sarai increased. Sarai began to treat Hagar harshly, and the relationship between the two women deteriorated. Hagar, feeling wronged and mistreated, fled to the desert, seeking refuge and peace away from the tension and conflict. In the desert, Hagar found a well of water and sat down there, exhausted and despairing. It was then that the angel of the Lord appeared to her and said, "Hagar, Sarai's servant, where have you come from, and where are you going?" Genesis 16, verse 8. Hagar responded that she was fleeing from Sarai, and the angel of the Lord instructed her to return and submit to her. The angel of the Lord also gave Hagar a promise. "I will multiply your descendants, so that they will be too numerous to count." Genesis 16, verse 10. He added, "You will bear a son, and you shall call his name Ishmael, for the Lord has heard your affliction." Genesis 16, verse 11. Ishmael, which means God hears, will be a constant reminder that God was with Hagar and her son. Hagar returned to Abram and Sarai's home and gave birth to Ishmael. The birth of Ishmael brought joy and hope to Abram, but it also increased tension between Sarai and Hagar. Sarai, feeling even more marginalized, continued to treat Hagar harshly, and peace in Abram's household seemed increasingly distant. Despite the hardships, Abram loved Ishmael and raised him as a son. He knew that although Ishmael was not the son of promise, he was a blessing from God and had a purpose in his life. Abram taught Ishmael the ways of God and prepared him for the future, knowing that God had a plan for him. The birth of Ishmael was a moment of great significance in the lives of Abram and Sarai. It was a reminder that God is faithful to his promises, even when the path seems uncertain and the circumstances are challenging. Through Ishmael, Abram and Sarai learned of God's grace and provision, and were prepared for the ultimate fulfillment of the promise of descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky. The story of Ishmael is a testament to God's faithfulness and his ability to turn difficult situations into blessings. Through faith and obedience, Abram and Sarai walked toward the fulfillment of God's promise, knowing that he was with them every step of the way. The years continued to pass, and Abram and Sarai remained steadfast in their faith, even in the face of uncertainty and challenges. One day, when Abram was 99 years old, God appeared to him again, bringing a message that would change the course of their lives forever. "I am God Almighty. Walk before me and be blameless. I will make a covenant with you and multiply you exceedingly." God then revealed a significant change to Abram. "No longer will your name be called Abram. Your name will be Abraham, for I have made you a father of many nations." Genesis 17, verse 5. And it was not just Abram's name that was changed. God also changed Sarai's name to Sarah, saying, "As for Sarai your wife, you shall not call her Sarah, for I will bless her and give you a son by her. Yes, I will bless her, and nations will come from her, and kings of peoples will come from her." But the most amazing revelation was yet to come. God promised Abraham that Sarah, who was already old and barren, would bear a son. "Sarah your wife will bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac, and I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his descendants after him." Genesis 17, verse 19. Abraham fell face down and laughed, not in disbelief, but in joy and amazement. He thought to himself, "Shall a son be born to a man who is 100 years old? And shall Sarai bear a child at the age of 90? To seal this covenant, God instituted a visible and permanent sign, circumcision. "This is my covenant, which you shall keep between me and you and your descendants after you. Every male among you shall be circumcised. You shall therefore circumcise the flesh of your foreskin, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and you." Genesis 17, verses 10 to 11. Circumcision would be a constant reminder of the covenant between God and Abraham, a sign that they belonged to God and were under his protection and blessing. Obedient and faithful, Abraham did not hesitate to fulfill God's command. He circumcised himself and all the males in his household, including the slaves born in his house and those bought with money. All the males were circumcised on the same day, as God had commanded. So Abraham was 99 years old when he was circumcised, and Ishmael his son was 13 years old when he was circumcised. On the same day Abraham and Ishmael his son were circumcised, and all the males in his house, whether born in his house or bought with money from foreigners, were circumcised with him. Circumcision became a sacred rite, a visible sign of the covenant between God and his people. It was a constant reminder that God had chosen Abraham and his descendants for a special purpose, and that he would be with them, guiding them and protecting them. The promise of a son to Sarah was something extraordinary, a miracle that only God could perform. Abraham and Sarah, despite their advanced ages, believed God's promise and waited with faith and expectation. They knew that God was faithful and would fulfill his word, even when everything seemed impossible. The story of Abram and Sarai's circumcision and name change is a powerful testimony to God's faithfulness and his ability to transform lives. Through this covenant, God established a people for himself, a people who would carry his blessing and purpose into the world. Abraham and Sarah, through their faith and obedience, became inspiring examples for all future generations, showing that with God, all things are possible. And so, with circumcision as a sign of the covenant and the promise of a son, Abraham and Sarah continued their journey of faith, knowing that God was with them and that his blessings and promises would be fulfilled in their lives and in the lives of their future generations. One warm, sunny afternoon, Abraham was sitting at the entrance to his tent, enjoying the gentle breeze that blew through the valley. Suddenly, he saw 3 men approaching. They walked with a grace and presence that immediately caught Abraham's attention. He sensed that these were no ordinary men. There was something divine in their appearance. Abraham, ever the hospitable man, quickly rose and ran to meet the visitors. "My lords," he said, bowing respectfully, "if I have found favor in your eyes, please do not pass by your servant. Let a little water be brought, and wash your feet, and sit down under the tree, and I will bring you a morsel of bread, and you shall eat your fill, and then pass on, since for this reason you have tarried with your servant." The visitors accepted Abraham's offer and sat down under the tree. Abraham, with Sarah's help, prepared a lavish meal. He ordered a tender calf to be prepared and instructed his servants to roast the meat. Sarah, in turn, prepared cakes from the finest flour. In addition, Abraham brought curds, milk, and the calf that had been prepared, and served it to his guests. While the guests were eating, one of them asked, "Where is Sarah, your wife?" Abraham answered, "She is in the tent." Then the guest, who was the Lord, said, "I will return to you about the time of your life. And behold, Sarah, your wife, will have a son." Sarah, who had been listening to the conversation from the entrance to the tent, laughed inwardly, saying, "Shall I have pleasure after I am old, and my master is old?" Genesis 18, verse 12. The promise of a son seemed absurd to Sarah, who was past the age of childbearing. But the Lord heard Sarah's laughter and said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Shall I really bear a son who is old?' Is anything too hard for God? At the appointed time, next year I will return to you, and Sarah will have a son." When Sarah heard this, she denied that she had laughed, for she was afraid. But the Lord said, "You laughed, no, for you laughed." The visit of the angels was a moment of great significance in the lives of Abraham and Sarah. It was a confirmation of God's promise that they would have a son, even in their old age. The promise of Isaac, which means laughter, was a reminder that with God, all things are possible, and that he can make the impossible a reality. After the visit of the angels, Abraham and Sarah continued to live in faith and expectation, knowing that God would fulfill his promise. They waited patiently and confidently, knowing that God's timing is perfect and that he always keeps his promises. The story of the angel's visit is a powerful testimony to God's faithfulness and his ability to accomplish the impossible. Through the faith and obedience of Abraham and Sarah, God established a legacy of blessing and purpose that would span generations. And so, with the promise of Isaac, Abraham and Sarah continued their journey of faith, knowing that God was with them and that his blessings and promises would be fulfilled in their lives and in the lives of their future generations. Time passed, and God's promise to Abraham and Sarah remained alive in their hearts. Despite the difficulties and challenges, they continued to believe that God would fulfill his word and that, in due time, Sarah would give birth to the promised son. The wait was long, but Abraham and Sarah's faith never wavered. One sunny morning, when Abraham turned 100 years old, a miracle occurred. Sarah, who was past the age of childbearing, felt the first pains of labor. Abraham's house was filled with a mixture of surprise and joy. The servants ran from one place to the other, preparing everything for the birth of the baby. Abraham, with his heart full of expectation, anxiously awaited the moment when he would finally see the son of the promise. When the moment arrived, Sarah gave birth to a healthy son. The baby's cry filled the house with indescribable joy. Abraham and Sarah looked at little Isaac with tears of gratitude in their eyes. They knew that this was the son of promise, the fulfillment of God's word. Sarah said, "God has given me cause for joy. Whoever hears will laugh with me." Abraham, filled with joy, named his son Isaac, which means laughter. This name was a constant reminder that God had heard Sarah's laughter and turned her unbelief into joy. Isaac was living proof that with God, all things are possible, and that he is faithful to his promises. The arrival of Isaac brought a new era of blessing and hope to Abraham's family. He was the son of the covenant, the heir to God's promises. Abraham and Sarah cared for Isaac with love and devotion, teaching him the ways of God and preparing him for the future God had planned for him. The joy of Isaac's birth was not limited to Abraham and Sarah alone. Everyone around them celebrated the arrival of the son of promise. Word spread quickly, and many came to visit Abraham and Sarah to share in their joy and bless little Isaac. Abraham's home was filled with laughter, music, and celebration. Abraham, now 100 years old, felt a renewal of strength and purpose. He knew that God had fulfilled his promise and that through Isaac, the promised nation would begin to be formed. Abraham continued to worship God with gratitude and live a life of faith and obedience, knowing that God was with him every step of the way. The birth of Isaac was a moment of great significance in the story of Abraham and Sarah. It was a powerful testimony to God's faithfulness and his ability to do the impossible. Through Isaac, God established a legacy of blessing and purpose that would span generations. The story of Isaac's birth is an inspiring reminder that God is faithful to his promises and that through faith and obedience, we can inherit the blessings and purpose he has for our lives. Abraham and Sarah, with their unwavering faith, became inspiring examples for all future generations, showing that with God, all things are possible. And so, with the arrival of Isaac, Abraham and Sarah continued their journey of faith, knowing that God was with them and that his blessings and promises would be fulfilled in their lives and in the lives of their future generations. Years passed, and Isaac grew into a strong, lively young man. Abraham, now over 100 years old, watched his son with a mixture of pride and love. He knew that Isaac was the son of promise, the fulfillment of God's words, and his heart was filled with gratitude. However, one day God decided to test Abraham's faith in a way that would challenge all its limits. "Abraham," God called. "Here I am." Abraham responded with reverence and readiness. God then gave him a command that seemed impossible to fulfill. "Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I will tell you." God's words echoed in Abraham's mind, and he felt a pang in his heart. How could God ask him to sacrifice the son he loved so much, the son of promise? Yet Abraham knew that God was faithful and just, and that his commands, however difficult, had a purpose. With a heavy heart, but full of faith, Abraham resolved to obey. The next morning, Abraham rose early, saddled his donkey, and chopped wood for the burnt offering. He called Isaac and 2 of his servants and set out for the place God had told him about. During the 3-day journey, Abraham remained silent, lost in thought and prayer. Isaac, sensing his father's concern, asked, "My father." "Here I am, my son," Abraham replied. "Here is the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham responded with unwavering faith, "God will provide himself the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." And so they continued on their journey until they reached the place God had told them about. When they reached Mount Moriah, Abraham left his servants with the donkey and said to them, "Stay here with the donkey. The boy and I will go over there, and when we have worshipped, we will come back to you." Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on Isaac, and he himself carried the fire and the knife. And the 2 of them went together. When they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar and arranged the wood on it. Then he tied Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Abraham reached out and took the knife to sacrifice his son. It was a moment of tension and pain, but Abraham was willing to obey God, even if it meant the greatest sacrifice of his life. However, at the last moment, the angel of the Lord called from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham." "Here I am," Abraham replied. The angel of the Lord said, "Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught in a thicket by its horns. He took the ram and offered it as a burnt offering in place of his son. Abraham called that place, "The Lord will provide." And to this day it is said, "On the mountain of the Lord it will be provided." The angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, "As the Lord has sworn, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you and multiply your descendants as the stars of the heavens and as the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will possess the gates of their enemies. In your descendants, all the nations of the earth will be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice." Abraham and Isaac returned to the servants, and together they returned to Beersheba, where Abraham lived. Abraham's faith had been tested and tried, and God blessed him greatly for his obedience. The story of the sacrifice of Isaac became a powerful testimony to Abraham's unwavering faith and God's faithfulness. Through this trial, Abraham demonstrated that his faith in God was stronger than anything else. He was willing to sacrifice everything, even the things he loved most, in order to obey God. And God, in his mercy and justice, provided a way and blessed Abraham greatly. The sacrifice of Isaac is a reminder that faith in God can lead us to make unimaginable sacrifices, but that he always provides for and blesses those who obey him. The story of Abraham and Isaac continues to inspire generations, showing that with God, all things are possible, and that obedience and faith are rewarded with unimaginable blessings. Years passed, and Abraham and Sarah lived a full and blessed life, full of joy and challenges. Sarah, the mother of the promised son Isaac, was a woman of faith and courage, always by Abraham's side through his journeys and trials. However, like all things on earth, Sarah's life came to an end. On a peaceful morning, Sarah closed her eyes for the last time, surrounded by the love of her family. She had lived 127 years, a long and meaningful life. Her departure left a deep void in the hearts of Abraham and all who knew her. News of her death spread quickly, and many came to pay their respects and mourn her loss. Abraham, with a heavy heart, knew that he needed to find a worthy burial place for his beloved wife. He remembered a cave in Machpelah, near Hebron, that belonged to Ephron the Hittite. Abraham decided that this would be the perfect place for Sarah's eternal rest. With determination, Abraham went to the sons of Het and said, "I am a stranger and a sojourner among you. Give me a possession of a burial place among you, that I may bury my dead and put him out of my sight." Genesis 23 verse 4. The sons of Heth responded with respect and honor, acknowledging Abraham's position among them. "Listen to us, our Lord. You are a prince of God among us. Bury your dead in the choicest of our graves. None of us will withhold his burial place from you to bury your dead." Genesis 23 verse 6. Abraham then stood up and bowed down before the people of the land, the sons of Heth. And he spoke to them, saying, "If it is in your favor that I bury my dead out of my sight, then listen to me and intercede for me with Ephron son of Zohar, that he may give me the cave of Machpelah, which he has at the edge of his field. Let him give it to me for the full price, as a possession for a burial place among you." Genesis 23 verses 7 to 9. Ephron, who was sitting among the sons of Heth, answered Abraham in the hearing of the people of the land, all who entered the gate of his city, saying, "Listen to me, my lord. The land is worth 400 shekels of silver. What is that between me and you? Please bury your dead there." Genesis 23 verses 10 to 11. Abraham wisely and respectfully answered, "Listen to me. I will give you the price of the land. Take it from me, and I will bury my dead there." Genesis 23 verse 13. Ephron answered Abraham, "Listen to me, my lord. The land is worth 400 shekels of silver. What is that between you and me? Bury your dead." Genesis 23 verses 14 to 15. Abraham weighed out to Ephron the price he had announced in the hearing of the Hittites, for 100 shekels of silver, current money with the merchant. So the cave of the field of Machpelah, which was opposite Mamre, the field and the cave that was in it, and all the trees that were in the field and all around it, became Abraham's possession in the sight of the Hittites, in the sight of all who went in at the gate of their city. Genesis 23 verses 16 to 18. After this, Abraham buried Sarah his wife in the cave of the field of Machpelah, which is opposite Mamre, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And the field and the cave that was in it became Abraham's possession as a burial place for the sons of Heth. Genesis 23 verses 19 to 20. Abraham's purchase of the cave of Machpelah was an act of love and respect for Sarah. He wanted to ensure that she would have a dignified and sacred place to rest forever. The cave of Machpelah became not only Sarah's burial place, but also the place where Abraham and many of his descendants would be buried, establishing a legacy of faith and devotion that would endure for generations. Sarah's death marked a turning point in Abraham's life. He had lost his longtime companion, the mother of his promised son. Yet Abraham knew that life went on and that God had a greater purpose for him and his family. He continued to live in faith and obedience, knowing that God was with him every step of the way. The story of Sarah's death and the purchase of the cave of Machpelah is a powerful testament to Abraham's faith and love. He showed that even in pain and loss, it is possible to find comfort and purpose in God. The cave of Machpelah became a symbol of hope and continuity, a reminder that faith in God transcends life and death. And so, with Sarah's death and the purchase of the cave of Machpelah, Abraham continued his journey of faith, knowing that God was with him and that his blessings and promises would be fulfilled in his life and in the lives of his future generations. Years passed, and Abraham, now an elderly man, began to think about the future of his son Isaac. He knew it was important to find a suitable wife for Isaac, someone who shared his faith and values, and who could continue the lineage promised by God. Abraham called his oldest and most trusted servant, who managed his entire household, and gave him a crucial mission. "Put your hand under my thigh, and I will make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you shall not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I dwell, but you shall go to my country and to my kindred, and take a wife from there for my son Isaac." The servant, understanding the importance of the mission, swore to Abraham that he would carry out his command. Abraham, trusting his servant, blessed him and sent him on his journey. The servant set out with 10 camels loaded with his master's goods, heading from Mesopotamia to the city of Nahor. When he reached the city, the servant had the camels kneel down outside the city by a well, at the time when the women went out to draw water. He prayed to God for a sign to identify the right woman for Isaac. O Lord, the God of my master Abraham, give me a good time today and show kindness to my master Abraham. See, I am standing by the spring of water, and the daughters of the men of the city are coming out to draw water. Now let the young woman to whom I say, tip down your jar now, and I will drink. And she says, drink, and I will give your camels water also. Be the one you have chosen for your servant Isaac, and by this I will know that you have shown kindness to my master. Before the servant had finished praying, Rebekah, who had been born to Bethuel son of Milcah, the wife of Nahor, Abraham's brother, came out with a pitcher on her shoulder. The young woman was very beautiful, a virgin whom no man had ever known. She went down to the spring, filled her pitcher, and came up. The servant ran to meet her and said, Please give me a little water from your pitcher to drink. Rebekah said, Drink, my lord. So she hurriedly lowered her pitcher onto her hand and gave him a drink. When she had finished giving him a drink, she said, I will also draw water for your camels until they have finished drinking. The servant was amazed and watched her in silence, wondering whether the Lord had made his journey prosperous or not. When the camels had finished drinking, the servant took out a gold jewel weighing half a shekel and 2 gold bracelets weighing 10 shekels. He said, Whose daughter are you? Please tell me. Is there room in your father's house for us to spend the night? Rebekah answered, I am the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Milcah, whom she bore to Nahor. She added, We also have plenty of straw and fodder, and room to spend the night. Then the servant bowed down and worshipped the Lord, saying, Blessed be the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not turned back from his kindness and his truth to my master. As for me, the Lord has led me to the house of my master's brothers. The young woman ran and told her mother all these things. Rebekah had a brother named Laban. When he ran out to meet the man at the spring, he saw the bracelets and the jewel on his sister's nose, and heard the words of Rebekah his sister, saying, This is what the man said to me. So he came to him, and behold, he was standing by the camels at the spring. And he said, Come, you who are blessed by the Lord, why are you standing outside? I have prepared the house and a place for the camels. The servant was brought to the house of Bethuel, and the camels were unloaded, and straw and fodder were given. They gave water to the servant to wash his feet, and to the men who were with him. They set food before him, but he said, I will not eat until I have told you what I have to say. The servant told the whole story, from the time Abraham sent him until that day, and how God had guided him to Rebekah. He explained the mission Abraham had given him and the oath he had sworn. Now therefore, if you are ready to deal kindly and truly with my master, tell me. But if not, tell me, and I will go elsewhere. Laban and Bethuel replied, This is from the Lord. We cannot say good or bad to you. Here is Rebekah. Go, and let her be your master's son's wife, as the Lord has said. When the servant heard these words, he bowed down to the ground before the Lord. Then he took out silver and gold articles and clothing and gave them to Rebekah. He also gave precious things to her brother and her mother. Then he and the men who were with him ate and drank and spent the night there. The next morning the servant said, Let me go to my master. But Rebekah's brother and mother said, Let the young woman stay with us for a few days, at least 10, and then she may go. Then the servant insisted, Do not detain me, for the Lord has made my journey prosperous. Let me go to my master. They replied, Let us call the young woman and inquire of her. So they called Rebekah and said to her, Will you go with this man? She said, I will. So they let Rebekah and her nurse go with Abraham's servant and his men. And they blessed Rebekah, saying, Our sister, may you become thousands of thousands, and may your descendants possess the gates of those who hate you. So Rebekah and her maids mounted the camels and followed the man. The servant took Rebekah and set off. Isaac, who had come back from the well of Laroi, for he lived in the land of the Negev, went out to meditate in the field at twilight. When he looked up, he saw the camels coming. Rebekah also looked up and saw Isaac and got off the camel. She said to the servant, Who is that man walking in the field to meet us? The servant said, It is my master. Then she took her veil and covered herself. The servant told Isaac everything he had done. Isaac brought Rebekah into the tent of his mother Sarah, and he took Rebekah as his wife, and he loved her. Thus Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. The marriage of Isaac and Rebekah was a time of great joy and significance. They continued God's promised lineage, and their union was blessed with love and faith. The story of Isaac and Rebekah's marriage is a powerful testimony to God's faithfulness and his divine provision, showing that he guides and blesses those who obey him and trust in his plans. And so, with the marriage of Isaac and Rebekah, God's promise continued to be fulfilled, and the lineage of Abraham was perpetuated, bringing hope and blessings to future generations. After Sarah's death, Abraham felt a deep emptiness in his heart. He had lost his longtime companion, the mother of his promised son, Isaac. However, life went on, and Abraham knew he had to move on. It was then that he decided to take Keturah as his wife. Keturah was a woman of beauty and virtue, and Abraham found comfort and companionship in her presence. Keturah soon became an integral part of Abraham's life, and together they had several children. Abraham's home was once again filled with laughter and joy as Keturah's children grew up alongside Isaac. Abraham, always a man of faith and wisdom, taught all of his children the ways of God, instructing them in righteousness and truth. Keturah's sons were Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. Each of them had their own unique characteristics and gifts, and Abraham loved them all equally. He provided for them all, making sure they had everything they needed to live a full and blessed life. Abraham gave gifts to the sons of his concubines, and while he was still alive, he sent them eastward to the land of Canaan, away from his son Isaac. However, Abraham knew that God's promise was with Isaac. He was the son of promise, the one through whom the chosen nation would be established. Abraham took special care of Isaac, teaching him everything he knew about God and his promises. He wanted to make sure that Isaac was prepared to carry the spiritual inheritance and the responsibility that came with it. Abraham gave all his possessions to Isaac, but to the sons of his concubines, whom Abraham had, Abraham gave gifts and sent them away from there eastward to the land of Canaan while he was still alive. Abraham's life was long and full of blessings. He lived to be 175 years old, and when the time came for him to die, he was reunited with his people. His sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah in the field of Ephron's son of Zohar the Hittite, which is opposite Mamre. There Abraham and Sarah his wife were buried. The story of Keturah's sons is a testament to Abraham's faithfulness and obedience to God. He provided for all his children, but he knew that God's promise was with Isaac. Through his life and actions, Abraham showed that faith and obedience are rewarded with blessings and purpose. And so, with Abraham's death, God's promise continued to be fulfilled through Isaac, ensuring that God's chosen lineage and blessings would be perpetuated for future generations. 15. #, the death of Abraham. Abraham, the patriarch whose life was marked by a journey of faith and obedience, lived to the ripe old age of 175. His life was a living testament to God's faithfulness and his ability to fulfill promises that seemed impossible. Abraham had faced many challenges and trials, but through each of them, he maintained his unwavering faith and trust in the Lord. In his final days, Abraham reflected on his life and the blessings God had given him. He remembered the promise that his descendants would be as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. He thought of Isaac, the son of promise, and all the children he had had with Keturah. Each of them was a blessing and a reminder of God's love and provision. Abraham knew that his time on earth was coming to an end, but he was at peace. He had fulfilled his mission and left a legacy of faith and obedience for his future generations. His teachings and faith would be passed on through Isaac and all his descendants, perpetuating God's promise. When the final moment arrived, Abraham was gathered to his people. He died at a good and ripe old age, old and full of days, and was gathered to his people. Isaac and Ishmael, his sons, were at his side, paying their last respects and honoring the memory of their father. Abraham's body was carried with reverence and love to the cave of Machpelah in the field of Ephron's son of Zohar the Hittite, which is opposite Mamre. There he was buried next to Sarah, his beloved wife. The cave of Machpelah became a sacred place, a symbol of God's love and faithfulness, and a reminder of Abraham's legacy of faith. Abraham's death marked the end of an era, but also the beginning of a new journey for his family. Isaac, now the heir of the promise, was prepared to continue his father's legacy. He knew he had a great responsibility, but he was also certain that God would be with him, just as he had been with Abraham. Abraham's story is a powerful testament to faith and obedience. He showed that even in the face of the greatest trials, faith in God can move mountains and fulfill seemingly impossible promises. His legacy continues to inspire generations, showing that obedience and faith are rewarded with blessings and purpose. And so, with Abraham's death, God's promise continued to be fulfilled through Isaac, ensuring that God's chosen lineage and blessings would be perpetuated for generations to come. Abraham's faith lives on in each of us, reminding us that with God, all things are possible. Abraham, the patriarch who marked history with his unwavering faith and obedience to God, reached the final chapters of his life, full of challenges, trials, and fulfilled promises. After decades of walking with God, from foreign lands to mountains of sacrifice, the man who was called to be the father of a great nation saw the divine promises begin to come true. Now, in his final days, Abraham contemplates the fruits of his trust and dedication as the legacy of his covenant with God prepares to be perpetuated through his descendants. It is a time of reflection, hope, and continuity of what he began under the guidance of the Almighty. Thank you for watching this far. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. Until next time.